The funeral service of Hulk Hogan. Wrestling world shattered. Hulk Hogan's emotional funeral at 71. The legend is gone. Witness the powerful and heartfelt moments from the funeral service of WWE icon Hulk Hogan, who passed away at age 71 from cardiac arrest. In this emotional tribute, we take you inside the private ceremony where family, close friends, and wrestling legends gathered to say goodbye. From Brooke Hogan's tearful speech to never-before-seen moments behind the scenes, this video captures the raw grief and enduring legacy of the man known as the Immortal. The sun rose heavy and silent over Clearwater Beach, Florida, casting a golden hue over the quiet streets that once echoed with the energy of one of wrestling's most beloved sons. But on this morning, the air was still. There were no booming entrance themes, no roaring fans, no flexing or finger-pointing. Just solemn faces, tight embraces, and a deep, suffocating silence that hung in the air like a fog. Hulk Hogan, born Terry Eugene Bollea, had passed away just days earlier from a sudden cardiac arrest. And now, at the age of 71, the man once known as the Immortal was being laid to rest. The private ceremony was held at a secluded waterfront chapel, modest in structure but grand in spirit. It wasn't chosen for its size or glamour, but for its quiet dignity. A place where those who truly knew Hogan could gather, not the performer, but the man. Outside, security kept a respectful but firm perimeter, protecting the privacy of a moment that felt almost too sacred to share. But inside those walls, legends stood shoulder to shoulder. Grown men who once collided like titans in the ring now stood with heads bowed, wiping away tears as if admitting that even heroes could fall. The front row told a story in itself. Brooke Hogan, his daughter, was there, her face pale, lips trembling as she clutched the folded bandana that had once proudly crowned her father's head. Nick Hogan, his son, sat beside her, arms wrapped protectively around his sister. Behind them, familiar faces from generations of wrestling sat in stunned reverence. Ric Flair, his own face weathered by decades of loss and survival, looked shattered. Triple H, The Undertaker, Vince McMahon, and even younger stars like Roman Reigns, Seth Rollins, and John Cena were all present. There were no factions here. No rivalries. Just grief. The ceremony began not with a dramatic speech or music, but with a simple, painful silence. It lasted almost a full minute before the officiant, an old friend of Hogan's from his early days in Tampa, finally broke it with the words, "We are gathered here not to mourn the end of Hulk Hogan, but to honor the life of Terry Bollea, the man, the father, the friend, the dreamer." As the ceremony unfolded, memories spilled into the room like warm light through stained glass. Brooke Hogan was the first to speak. She walked slowly to the podium, her heels echoing in the hushed chapel. Her voice cracked from the start. "My dad wasn't perfect. He was flawed, complicated, but he was ours. And in his own way, he was magical." She recalled childhood moments, the way he'd tuck her in at night whispering, "Don't let the bedbugs bite, brother," and the way his giant hands would gently fix her hair before she went on stage. The room wept with her, as she shared a story about how her father once flew across the country after a show just to surprise her at a school recital, even though he'd wrestled with cracked ribs the night before. Nick followed, and though his relationship with his father had seen more turbulence over the years, the pain in his voice was undeniable. "He tried," Nick said. "He tried to be better every single day. He taught me about resilience, not just the kind you use in a match, but the kind you need when you mess up. When you're broken. When you lose your way." Then came the tributes from Hogan's brothers in the business. Ric Flair stood, arms trembling, lips pressed tightly together. When he finally spoke, the words were barely a whisper. There was no wrestling without Hulk Hogan. He was the oxygen. He was the thunder. And even now, I still can't believe he's gone. The Nature Boy paused, glancing at the closed casket draped in a custom American flag with red and yellow trim, an ode to Hogan's iconic colors. "He was my rival. He was my friend. He was my brother. And I loved him." Undertaker spoke next. The dead man, a character built on silence and stoicism, appeared vulnerable and human for the first time in years. He was bigger than the business, Taker said. He was the reason many of us stepped into that ring. When I was just a rookie watching WrestleMania 3, I believed in him. Not just as a character, but as a symbol. Of strength. Of hope. Of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. The service continued with private moments captured only by memory. A video montage played, showcasing Hogan's greatest moments, lifting Andre the Giant at WrestleMania, facing down The Rock in Toronto, walking the aisle with that unmistakable strut and cupped ear. But also the quiet footage, him cradling his newborn daughter, kissing his mother on the cheek backstage, holding hands with fans during hospital visits. A man remembered for the roar of the crowd, now honored for the whispers of kindness too often overlooked. Throughout the ceremony, Sharon, Hogan's longtime partner in his final years, remained quiet. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand never left the casket once. Friends who knew them both said she had been his anchor in his final decade, a calming presence that helped him reconcile with past mistakes and find peace in a life that had often spiraled under the weight of fame. At one point, Vince McMahon took the stage. It was rare to see him emotional. But this wasn't the brash billionaire with the booming voice. This was a man confronting the end of an era he helped build. Without Hulk Hogan, none of this exists, Vince said, gesturing subtly to the countless wrestlers seated before him. He wasn't just a superstar. He was the superstar. He put us on the map. He changed the world. Then, lowering his voice, he added, and he never stopped believing in people, even when they stopped believing in him. There was an air of unspoken tension too. Hogan had lived through scandals, controversies, and public downfalls. But on this day, none of that mattered. The funeral didn't whitewash his past, it acknowledged it. Several speakers addressed the pain, the mistakes, the lessons learned. One of his closest friends described Hogan as a man constantly learning how to be better. Redemption wasn't an idea, it was his mission. And in those final years, he made amends with many of the people he had hurt, rebuilding bridges brick by brick. As the service drew to a close, the chapel doors were opened and pallbearers rose quietly. Roman Reigns, John Cena, Triple H, Randy Orton, Ric Flair, and Nick Hogan carried the casket through the aisle. Not as characters, not as wrestlers, but as men carrying the weight of memory, of legacy, of goodbye. Outside, the sky had grown overcast. A soft drizzle began to fall as they placed the casket into the hearse. Fans had gathered in silence beyond the barricades, holding handmade signs, American flags, and red and yellow bandanas. Many were crying. Some were chanting softly, "Thank you, Hogan. Thank you, Hogan." In the distance, bagpipes began to play, Amazing Grace echoing over the waterfront like a lullaby for a giant. It was the final tribute from Roddy Piper's son, who had insisted on honoring his father's greatest rival and closest friend, the same way fans had once honored Piper himself. As the hearse drove away, a rainbow appeared faintly in the sky. Some said it was a coincidence. Others said it was something more. But to those gathered, it didn't matter. What mattered was that a man who had lived so loudly, who had fallen, risen, and fallen again, was finally at peace. Back at the chapel, a final note had been left at the pulpit. A handwritten letter from Hulk Hogan himself, dated just months before his death. It read, "To my fans, my family, my brothers in this crazy business, thank you for never giving up on me. I've lived 10 lifetimes in one body, and I'm proud of the journey, even the scars. If I made you smile, if I made you believe, then I did my job. I'll see you all again someday, brother. Until then, say your prayers, eat your vitamins, and never stop dreaming." The letter ended with his signature, a scrawled red and yellow HH. And just like that, the curtain closed. Not on a match, not on a storyline, but on a life that redefined an entire generation. As the hearse disappeared beyond the tree-lined path, flanked by a motorcade of black SUVs and police escorts, the hush that blanketed the crowd didn't lift, it deepened. Hulk Hogan had been so much more than a wrestler to the people who stood there in the drizzle, unmoving, clutching photographs, homemade signs, and action figures worn down from years of childhood play. For many, this was the final chapter of a story that had begun in the living room, in front of a glowing television screen, when they were just children. The mourners didn't leave right away. Some stood in silence, others cried quietly. Grown men, hardened by life and time, wept openly without shame. Fathers hugged sons. Old friends held hands. It was a collective mourning, not just for a man, but for an era. An era where good guys wore red and yellow, where belief in heroes wasn't foolish, and where one man, through charisma, bravado, and unwavering presence, made people believe they could overcome anything. At the private reception that followed, held at a beachfront estate Hogan had once called his sanctuary, the tone shifted from sorrow to celebration. Not in a party sense, but in a deeply human way, where tears mingled with laughter and stories flowed like waves crashing onto the shore just a few yards away. A mural had been erected on the far wall, featuring moments from his life, not just from WrestleMania or WCW Nitro, but real-life snapshots. Hulk teaching his son how to fish. Hogan wearing a Santa hat and passing out toys to children in need. A candid photo of him and Andre the Giant sitting together quietly, drinking beer in a smoky bar, their massive silhouettes framed against neon lights. Inside the reception hall, a long table displayed memorabilia spanning Hogan's journey. His original championship belt from the 1980s, faded from wear. The red and yellow feather boa he wore during his return to WWE in the early 2000s, the sunglasses, the cross necklace, the boots. But at the center sat something more personal, a framed note handwritten by his daughter Brooke when she was just 9 years old. In crayon, it read, "Daddy, I don't care how many matches you win. You'll always be my hero. Love, Brooke." It was here that more stories emerged, unfiltered, untelevised, raw. Booker T told a story of how Hogan, despite the controversy that had once come between them, had reached out years later with sincere humility and offered not just an apology, but a conversation. It wasn't for PR, Booker said. It was real. That's who he was trying to become in his later years. Not just a champion in the ring, but in real life. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson wasn't able to attend the service due to a filming obligation overseas, but he sent a heartfelt video message played on a projector during the reception. Dressed in a crisp black suit, eyes heavy with grief, The Rock said, "Without Hulk Hogan, there is no Rock. He was the blueprint. He showed us what was possible. He took a niche sport and turned it into a global phenomenon. But more than that, he was one of the few people who truly believed in the idea that we could be more than our personas. He believed in us. And now we carry him forward." Stone Cold Steve Austin, usually a man of few words when it came to emotional matters, raised a glass of beer as he addressed the room. "There'll never be another like him," he said. "We had our moments, we threw our fists and egos around, but when the bell rang and the lights went down, Hulk always found a way to bring the magic back. He was the magic." One of the most poignant speeches of the day came from none other than Linda Bolia, Hulk Hogan's ex-wife. She hadn't spoken to him much in recent years, and their divorce had been well publicized, acrimonious even. But death has a way of peeling back layers, exposing what's true beneath the headlines and bitterness. Linda took the microphone with trembling hands and said, "We built a life together. We built a family. And through all the storms, the chaos, the pressure, I never stopped caring about him. The man I met before the fame, before the spotlight, he was gentle. He was hopeful. And even in our darkest hours, I always knew he carried that light inside him." Even the younger generation of WWE stars paid their respects. Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, Becky Lynch, Bianca Belair, all came forward with stories about how watching Hogan as kids had inspired them to chase this wild dream of becoming WWE superstars. "I used to stand on my bed with a pillow wrapped around my waist and do the poses," Kevin Owens said with a smile that quickly melted into tears. "I never met my dad. But when I watched Hulk Hogan, I felt like I had one." Backstage, WWE staff were given the opportunity to speak, too. A longtime lighting technician who worked on nearly every major Hogan event in the 80s and 90s shared a quiet but impactful anecdote. "We were running behind one night before WrestleMania," he said. "I was stressed, almost in tears. Hogan pulled me aside, looked me in the eye, and said, 'You're the real main event tonight, brother. Without you, no one sees anything.'" He understood. He valued people. Outside, a memorial had been set up by fans. Dozens of life-sized cardboard cutouts of Hogan lined the sidewalk. Some wore makeshift angel wings. Others held signs that read, "R.I.P. to the real superhero." A little boy no older than 6 wore a replica of Hogan's red and yellow gear and stood in front of the casket display with his father, whispering, "He's up there now, right, Daddy? With Macho Man and Ultimate Warrior." His father didn't answer. He just knelt beside him and nodded, brushing tears from his cheeks. Later that evening, after the crowd had begun to thin and the sun began to dip below the horizon, Brooke Hogan returned to the chapel alone. Security gave her space. She stood by the altar where her father's casket had been earlier in the day. The candles were still flickering. The air still smelled faintly of roses and cedarwood. And for a moment, she just stood there in silence. Then she took out a guitar, her father's, the one he kept in his Florida home for quiet nights, and sang softly. It wasn't a wrestling theme. It wasn't even a public performance. Just her voice breaking, singing, "You're My Sunshine." The same lullaby he used to hum to her before bed, back when the world was smaller, simpler, and filled with the comfort of his arms. One of the staff members at the chapel quietly recorded a portion of it, not for the press, not for clicks, but for history. Because it was real. It was love. It was everything Hulk Hogan ever stood for when the cameras weren't rolling. In the days that followed, fans around the world organized vigils. Madison Square Garden dimmed its lights for 10 seconds before a WWE show. WWE aired a tribute video featuring never-before-seen footage of Hogan interacting with fans, backstage crew, and his colleagues. The narration ended with one final sentence. "Terry Bollea showed us that even the strongest can hurt and that even giants need love." For many, the funeral didn't mark an end. It marked a beginning. The beginning of a legacy reborn not just through highlight reels or action figures, but through compassion, forgiveness, and the recognition that behind every superstar is a soul trying to be understood. And in the heart of that soul was a simple truth. Hulk Hogan was, and always will be, the embodiment of belief. Belief in goodness. Belief in power. Belief that anyone, no matter how broken, could rise again. In the weeks following the funeral, the world began to absorb the reality that Hulk Hogan, the Hulk Hogan, was truly gone. Tributes poured in from every corner of the globe. From Japan to London, Mexico City to Sydney, fans and fellow wrestlers alike took to social media, interviews, and podcasts to share what the man meant to them, not just as a performer, but as a cultural cornerstone, a father figure, and, for many, the first hero they ever believed in. WWE headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut lowered its flag to half-mast. In a rare move, the company issued a full-day blackout across its social media accounts in Hogan's memory. No announcements, no promotions, just a single image, a black-and-white photo of Hogan in a prayer pose, eyes closed, captioned simply, "Rest in power." Across wrestling schools in the U.S. and abroad, trainees gathered in silence to watch his most iconic matches, WrestleMania 3, the NWO heel turn, the epic face-off with The Rock in Toronto. In those small, dimly lit gyms filled with blood, sweat, and broken dreams, they stood still, watching the man who redefined what it meant to carry a company. The man who made it cool to care, to stand up, to fight back. And fight he did both in and out of the ring. It wasn't lost on the fans or the industry that Hogan's life had been complicated. He had been exalted and condemned, revered and ridiculed. At times, the hero, at others, the cautionary tale. But what made the mourning more profound was the understanding that Hogan never stopped evolving. He never stopped seeking redemption. In his final years, away from the spotlight, he worked quietly to rebuild what fame and mistakes had damaged. He sought reconciliation with estranged friends. He reconnected with communities he had unintentionally hurt. And perhaps most tellingly, he spent time away from the cameras, just being Terry, the man, not the myth. Shawn Michaels recalled during a tribute show on Raw that Hogan had called him a few months prior just to say thank you. He told me, "Brother, I know we had heat, but you helped make me better." Shawn paused, wiping tears from his eyes. It was the kind of call you don't expect, but it stayed with me. And now? It means everything. Paul "Triple H" Levesque, now one of WWE's top executives, gave a powerful speech during a special Hall of Fame-style tribute night broadcasted live. Hogan gave wrestling its wings, he said. He made the impossible seem real. And when the lights dimmed, when the cheers faded, he still tried to do right. That's what makes a legend. Not the fame, but the fight to stay human through it all. The most viral moment came when a fan named Marcus posted a TikTok video that quickly gained millions of views. In it, he shared a clip from 1992, an old VHS recording of himself, a 6-year-old cancer patient, meeting Hulk Hogan backstage at a WWE event. In the video, Hogan kneels beside the boy, flexes his biceps, and softly tells him, "You're stronger than me, little man." Marcus, now 38 and cancer-free, looked into the camera and said, "He didn't just change my day. He changed my life. And now I wear red and yellow every year on his birthday." Rest easy, champ. News programs around the world aired segments on Hogan's life and legacy. ESPN produced a special titled The Immortal Truth, while even CNN and BBC gave extended tributes to a man whose name had transcended sports entertainment. But perhaps the most touching tribute came from someone unexpected: Sylvester Stallone. In a rare public statement, Stallone, who had cast Hogan as Thun